I let rip, basically. I started smoking dope. I was drinking a lot, having a lot of one-night stands. I thought I was being cool. I thought it would have been boring. I thought, well, I'm young, free, this is what I'm supposed to do. I couldn't form intimate relationships. I'd get asked out by men, and as soon as it got the slightest bit serious, I'd run a mile. I can remember people scrawling notes on my door, calling me a slut and stuff like that, quite derogatory stuff. And I also started contracting STDs quite quickly as well. I remember telling my dad and the humiliation having to admit it to him. If I'm working a programme in the day and I'm doing the next right thing, I can live with myself. And peace as well, that's one of the main things I've got now, peace of mind.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Lisa. Hi dear listener, thanks for tuning in. Today, we have another guest from a different fellowship than my own. I'm always keen on these episodes because they allow me to grow and hopefully reach more people and different people who share the same solution. Just as a reminder, 12 Steps and 12 Questions is for all 12 steppers, and I'm always keen to hear from all fellowships. We haven't had any gamblers or nearly enough food addicts, for example. So if this is you or someone you know, reach out to me on 12steps12questions@gmail.com or join our WhatsApp group. All links are in the show notes. And with that, let's get to my guest for today, Lisa. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, I'm Lisa W. And I'm a sex addict, also an alcoholic and drug addict. So I go for the whole lot. I've been in sobriety now for just over a year. And I live in Hampshire, in the UK. Yeah, it's me.
Thank you so much. Can I ask, just so that we're setting the scene, which fellowship was your first one that you came into?
I came into AA in the 90s. I had a stint in rehab, and back then I stayed around for about 5 years. Now my main fellowship's SAA because it's become apparent that's the main issue for me. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So we are going to discuss SAA mainly, but we'll cross over to AA as much or as little as you like.
Okay. Thanks.
Amazing. Let's start. The first of the 12 questions I ask every guest on this pod. Lisa, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
Yeah, that's quite an easy answer for me because I did. I didn't realise it till I came into recovery. There was a few things went on. I grew up in a family with a brother and sister. My dad was, well, he still is, a vicar and a solicitor. My mum was at home as a housewife. On the outside, it looked like a really privileged upbringing. We lived in a lovely village, big house, it looked perfect on the outside. But it was very different on the inside. I was always quite an awkward child. I was shy. I always felt socially awkward. I can remember at the age of 6, sort of questioning on myself, not feeling comfortable in myself. Things went downhill quite rapidly. At the age of 11, I started being sexually abused by a friend of my dad's who was also a vicar. And this went on unnoticed. My mum, when I got to the age of 14, had a massive breakdown and she stayed in bed for a whole year. Me being the middle child, I've discussed it with my dad since. He was away a lot. They were sort of splitting up in the process of breaking up, really. And he was working away from home. And my brother was older. He was off to uni and he was managing. My sister was younger, so my mum was still focused on her. And the attention I got left out a bit, really, and I was a bit slightly rebellious, a bit argumentative teenager. So I got kept away from my mum. I wasn't allowed to go in her room, wasn't allowed to see her, which was really confusing for me at the age of 14. And I felt quite rejected and alone at that stage. And it was that point, actually, that was quite where my obsessional type thinking started coming into play. I can remember being at school and just sitting feeling really alone and isolated and not able to focus on my work. I had friends, but nobody knew what was going on at home. We were encouraged not to speak about anything. my dad had quite good standing in the village. He was the vicar and all this sort of stuff. So our problems went undisclosed, really. My mum didn't get any help for her issues.
There's a lot really, a lot in there. And of course, first and foremost, I'd like to approach this as carefully as possible. You said you were sexually abused as a child. Now, we don't have to talk about this, but it is something that happens to, sadly, quite a lot of people, and far too many. So without wanting to pry and without wanting to be too forward, at the same time, perhaps there is something here, given that you mentioned it, that you would like to, with a view to your addiction and with a view to your later recovery, perhaps there's something that you want to talk about there as far as that is concerned.
Yeah, it definitely played. By the way, sorry, I'm quite comfortable talking about it now because I've had therapy and I've come to acknowledge it and I'm at peace with it now. But it did play a big part in my sex addiction developing, because for me, I was alone at the time, and that was a way, I saw it as a way of getting attention. Of course, I didn't really understand. I didn't realise what negative attention it was. But for me, it was attention at the end of the day. And from that moment on, that was the way I knew how to get attention.
Mm-hmm. As a child, you mean you were seeking attention in that way?
I started quite young. I started about the age of 14, really, to sort of become obsessed in that sort of area and sort of have fantasies. Mm-hmm. And I'd go off in my own head for quite a lot of the time, obsessing about people and about sort of sexual things. And for me, it was like an escape. Although it was really unhealthy, I was confused. I didn't realise how wrong it was at the time. I just felt uncomfortable with it. I knew it didn't feel right, but I didn't know why. And I almost found it flattering that this older person was giving me the attention, and I guess it's part of the grooming process, take me out on nice trips and treat me and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any other adults sort of giving me that at the time in the same way.
Would you say, it is the cliche, so feel free to hit me over the head if this is just a bit boring, but they say about middle children, I'm the youngest, so out of two, so I wouldn't know, but they say about middle children that they are sort of a bit forgotten and all of that. Is that something that you'd sort of agree with and you've experienced?
Yeah, I definitely felt that. My brother, I even had it said to me that he was like my grandparents' favourite because he was the first boy for a long time in the family,
Right.
My sister got a lot more attention being younger, and she was still quite young when my mum and dad split up. My dad really focused on seeing her at weekends and, contact with her. And I sort of left home at 18 and I just felt like I was floating around on my own. Yeah, a lot of the time. I seemed to always be the one that got into trouble for whatever reason,
Were you the black sheep then?
Yeah, definitely. I've always been the black sheep. And looking back, I wasn't that bad for a teenager compared with some teenagers, But my family quite strict and also strictly religious as well. We had to go to church every week. I got confirmed at the age of 11 and I had to go and stay at a monastery and do confession at the age of 11, And I can remember trying to think what I'd done wrong. It's like, it was my brother, stuff like that. I was like, didn't get it.
Yeah. I was just still hung up. Let me just voice this so that I can get out of the way. Otherwise, I'll be thinking about this in the back of my head for the rest of the episode. I'm not entirely sure if one still says black sheep. If I've offended anyone, I'd like to apologise. It is obviously just one of those expressions. I'm just trying to think about just getting the fullest picture I can from you here. Obviously, being the vicar's daughter, you're living in this idyllic place on the one hand, and then on the other hand, there's a lot of stuff and some really heavy stuff going on there that must have been really, really difficult to process for you.
Yeah.
Were you aware a little bit of this dichotomy, of this contradiction there between those two things?
Looking back, I think I was. I didn't totally understand it. And I really didn't understand emotions at that time. Again, emotions wasn't something we dealt with in the family. Very much brushed away,
So different to my family, I've said this a few times on here, I come from an Italian family, so, all you talk about is emotions, and if someone's always upset and there's doors banging and it's loud and people are yelling and then they're making up and then they're crying and rinse and repeat, so it's a little bit difficult for me to kind of get my head around this sort of seemingly quiet atmosphere in the house. But yet stuff was going on because your mother clearly was unwell.
Yeah. It wasn't, I could definitely feel the difference, and when I went to friends' houses, I was very aware that, how different it was. And, what's I going with that?
Into our question 2 is where you were going.
Yeah.
And that is, what did the moment you first got hooked, the fun times, what did that look like? So sometimes when we're not talking about alcohol and drugs and that party phase that I had in mind that many, not all, many alcoholics and drug addicts go through, of course, for different afflictions that might be different. So for some behaviors, there might not be that party phase and so on. So let's bear that in mind a little bit and talk about how that affected you. So the moment you first got hooked.
Well, I think I left home at 18 and went off to do my nurse training. And I let rip, basically. I started smoking dope. I was drinking a lot. We had a social club on the hospital grounds. It was like a reduced rate. I was in there a lot. And I was having a lot of one-night stands.
Yeah.
I thought I was enjoying myself, but looking back, there was always an underlying depression that I didn't understand. There was always a horrible feeling inside. And when I actually paused in my quiet moments and looked at what I was doing, I felt the shame quite quickly. There came a point when my friends, they didn't carry on with the partying for very long because we were on the wards working as well as training at the same time. We were actually paid members on the ward, members of staff on the ward at that point.
Yeah.
And so from the age of 18, so it was quite a lot of responsibility. They all stopped partying and I carried on. I thought I was being cool. I thought it would have been boring. I thought, well, I'm young, free, this is what I'm supposed to do. I went to festivals and stuff, which I absolutely loved. I've always loved that type of scene. I couldn't form intimate relationships. I'd get asked out by men. And as soon as it got the slightest bit serious, I'd bolt. I'd run a mile. I didn't ever understand that. I realised I had that pattern in me.
So if we slow this down just a little bit, I mean, the idea that you spoke of shame already a little bit there. So this tells me that there was some consequences and some uncomfortableness, some discomfort pretty early on. What was the shame around? Was it about the drinking and the partying, or was it about the being sexually active and in a way that perhaps, might not have been, how can I put this, might not have gone down well with in the village with the vicar?
That's right. That's what it was. It was my behaviours more than anything, the sexual acting out. When we say acting out in SAA, it basically is a term for like all the negative sexual behaviours. We use it as a broad term, so it's not triggering to people, rather than going into specific acts and stuff like that. It was a shame around that. And quite quickly, I started getting comments back from friends about it. I'd go off.
What kind of comments?
I can remember people scrawling notes on my door, calling me a slut and stuff like that. Quite derogatory stuff. So my shame was there. I felt quite a lot of shame, and I also started contracting STDs quite quickly as well. Like my first one at the age of 20, and the humiliation of having. I remember telling my dad, admitting to him. And the humiliation having to admit it to him wasn't very good. And he tried to support me. It was also around the time that HIV was starting to be on the news.
Yeah.
Remember the shame being so much that I was trying to tell my dad what I was up to. But because of his shock and his reaction, I backtracked and sort of covered it up and played it down. Yeah.
Okay. So there was pretty quickly a sense of doing wrong.
Yeah.
And, and I want to be really, really clear on this, and I hope that you're happy for me to say this, but I am not here, we are not here to judge anyone's behavior. And, people are fancy free, they can do whatever they like, and I specifically want to say that, we're not judging women for their behavior, or that they shouldn't be having one-night stands or having fun or be sexually free and sex positive. It is a sex positive podcast in that sense, right? But of course, for us, and I'm really keen on saying this because, people should go out there and have a good time, right? But of course, for us, just like I'm not against people drinking wine or, snorting coke if they want to, right? It is just, and I do need to make this clear, it is just that for us, right, these were the beginnings of a problem that we couldn't stop. So I just wanted to be really specific about this. How did it progress from there for you? I mean, you're already having some issues. I find it interesting that you would want to go and speak to your dad about it, as if you wanted absolution, I suppose.
Partly, I think, yes. And I knew I got brought up to believe sex before marriage was wrong. But to be like working my way around various men was like even worse, And also, I think I was still looking for approval from my parents quite a lot because I never felt like I was good enough. I never felt like I could please them. I wasn't very academic, so I felt in that respect I'd failed. My brother and sister, I think, I was still looking for approval, really, and support.
Do you mind me asking, I'm using your words here, working your way around different men is, I think, what you just said. Was there also a good time in that, or was it problematic really from the beginning? Some people are blackout drinkers from the first drink they take, right? That was certainly the case for me in terms of stimulants. The moment I was on ecstasy, I was up and running and I couldn't just take one, right? So, was there a good time in this, or was it problematic really from the beginning?
It's problematic from the beginning. I just had,
right.
It was against my moral compass and I knew that straight away, really. Yeah.
Difficult. Yeah. Okay. And probably fueled by a bit of booze as well then.
It was. And also I drank to take away the shame. I spent a lot of time afterwards in my room at the nurses' homes drinking, like a litre of vodka at a time just to block it out.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch, yeah. So, yeah.
Did you speak to your father about this in the end?
No. Do you know what? I really didn't understand it that much myself. I just knew I had this underlying depression, uncomfortableness. I remember being sent to counselling by my GP, at the age of 20, and just sitting there not knowing what to talk about. They'd say, what's going on? I'd say, I don't know, everything seems all right. It wasn't, obviously. Yeah, a lot of denial still.
And probably better that at that point you did not speak to your dad about it, I suppose. Not up to me to judge, of course, but I think we've all said things a bit too early. And caused a lot of harm rather than having the intended consequence. Yeah, absolutely. Now, working our way a little bit forward, and question 3 is, what were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom? So let's sort of carefully work our way towards that, because obviously this often covers quite a large amount of time. So how did it progress? And let's stick with the SAA stuff for now.
Sure. Basically, my children were taken away from me, actually. I got married, actually, late 90s. It was after I'd been in recovery in AA. I met my husband, thought I wasn't an alcoholic, started drinking again. But that relationship was extremely codependent, very messy. We both had affairs, saw other people, split up, got back together numerous times. We had children in the mix of that, which looking back wasn't the best. And I, after 10 years of marriage, I moved away. I had to move to another area due to domestic violence. But at the time, I blamed my husband for everything. But looking back, I had such an equal part in that. Excuse me. I was chaotic as heck, How he put up with me, I don't know.
Well, just a second, this is not to excuse domestic violence, right? So no. I'm sure that, we always look at our part, but some things are, let's just put a little bit of a caveat there that, physical violence is just not okay, so.
No, it wasn't all right. And it was quite a traumatic time. I moved back to Hampshire. I was living in Bristol at the time, actually, because I'd originally gone to Bristol for rehab in the 90s, and I stayed in Bristol. I moved back. I got put on a lot of psychiatric drugs. I mentally wasn't coping, which I then got hooked on. I got on the pills and stuff. And because the effect the pills had on me and preoccupation still with the sex addiction, I was still...
How did that manifest? Just in like fantasy kind of stuff?
No, I got sectioned. This was partly, I'd get psychotic. It's another element. I smoked dope as well and got psychotic from that. I ended up in hospital a few times. And I was very good at picking out vulnerable men. I didn't realise it, but looking back at the time, I'd home in on vulnerable people and end up having flings and relationships. There was one incident where I moved somebody back into my house after 2 weeks of knowing them, you know.
Right, let's slow this down just a sec, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
This type of behaviour there, that, I mean, it's very, you know, it's 2 sentences and they're packed with stuff. So how would you focus on vulnerable men and how did you, quote unquote, pounce on them? I
think I didn't realise I was picking on vulnerable men at the time. But again, a lot of the men that I met in the hospitals were in very, very bad places themselves and just looking for attention. A lot of them had their own issues with addiction and stuff like that. So they were just looking for comfort and affection. And I homed right in on that. And at the same time, I only had to have someone, you know, show that they liked me a bit. And in my head, I was often married to them, you know, and thought it was wonderful. I'd home in on that.
Would you describe yourself as predatorial in that phase?
Yeah, I would have. And objectified men as well. Just saw them as objects, basically. Looking back, that's always been a thing for me. Sounds awful, but yeah, I did. Just to get what I needed, get my fix.
So would that be a purely sexual fix, or would this also be other areas like emotional stuff or, well, anything else for that matter?
It was more sexual fix looking back. I was never into the love stuff. That stuff scared me. And the commitment side of stuff. But at the same time, I did have unrealistic expectations. And after the first few weeks with the initial sexual excitement dying down, I didn't want to know, you know, I'll be off onto the next person. But during this time, you asked about rock bottoms and consequences. Social services got heavily involved with my children.
Yeah.
And they did eventually get removed. They'd been in and out of foster care. My son went to live with his father in Bristol, and my stepmum and dad took in my daughter, where she's remained. And instead of that, you'd think for some people that would just spur people on to clean up their act, you know, and get in recovery. It did not. Had the opposite effect. I felt sorry for myself, blamed social services, everybody else.
Yeah.
And I got really heavily into smoking weed. And I had a massive rock bottom, but it wasn't enough to stop me. I'd gone into hospital really psychotic. I ended up having a horrific accident where I'm really lucky to have survived it, to be honest. I accidentally set myself on fire with a cigarette lighter. Got really severe burns.
God.
Yeah, I know. I lost my airways. I got told if the paramedics had turned up, just 1 minute later, they couldn't have revived me, you know. I was in a coma for 6 weeks.
Oh, Lisa.
I had so many skin grafts, like a few years after, you know. I was disabled. I came out of the hospital on a Zimmer frame because my muscles had all wasted away. It was a horrific time. But
let's slow this down for a second.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Or what I'm wondering a little bit around here is, one, how long did you stay in that space, right? Because I'm always just shocked, really, about how long we managed to stay in those really terrible places. Really, really terrible. Not that sort of middle of the road misery that we have where you're like plodding along and so on, but the really difficult places, sometimes we just end up staying there. So how long did you stay in there? And also, how did you justify this to yourself? And if you did, how, right? So did you think to yourself, well, I'm a bit of an alcoholic and I know that I'm kind of unmanageable, that's just what I do, right? Would have been one of those classic phrases. So how long, and did you justify?
I stayed in it for years and years and years. Really, I only really came out of it. I had ups and downs, obviously, but I only really came out of it a year ago just over a year ago when I got into recovery. I was so much a victim, you know?
Yeah.
I always thought it was everyone else's fault. Wherever I moved, whatever I did, disasters happened. It didn't occur to me that was me, that was why problems following me around, you know? I blamed everybody else for my accident. I blamed the staff for not keeping an eye on me. When I left the hospital, I was on a lot of medication. I was getting a lot of nerve pain and stuff from the scars. I got offered OxyContin. And my addict brain, I knew I didn't really need it for pain. My addict brain was straight in there. I was like, oh yeah, I like some of that. Great. Mm-hmm. And then I had about, how many years? I had quite a few years on that and gabapentin, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And ended up going down the legal route with that. Got so hooked on it. It was numbing everything.
Mm. It does highlight though, doesn't it, how those different kind of addictions, they just work with each other almost to defeat us, don't they? I mean, between getting really wasted on all this stuff, the booze, the weed, the pills and all the rest of it on the one hand, and on the other hand, having that sexual drive and that obsession, I suppose, really run riot with you. So I can, this is what I'm, not for the first time, but still, taking away from it is how they really, like cogs in a wheel, work with each other.
Yeah. And also, I didn't act out sexually for 10 years because I physically wasn't able to. And I had horrific scars, which was affecting my self-esteem and showing my body to people.
Of course.
And at the same time, I was full of self-pity. Understandably, afterwards, for a few years, I wasn't allowed to see my daughter unsupervised, because I was scared of my mental health and the effects on her. But that was just more excuse to wallow in self-pity and feel sorry for myself, that all this was going on.
Mm. If we're looking at then towards your rock bottom when you came into the rooms just over a year ago, what made you pick SAA? I mean, I'll let you talk about this, freely, for as long as is required. I'm just wondering that out of all those things you picked, the sex as being your main addiction. So I'm just really curious about that. So do talk to us a little bit about your rock bottom and how that came about.
Well, my mum became apparent during COVID that she developed dementia. I was all involved for a couple of years, quite heavily involved in her care. Then she went into a nursing home and I absolutely let rip. I thought I deserved a good time. I thought, now is my time to do what I want to do. The children were a bit older. So my acting out went through the roof. I couldn't control it. Basically, and I ended up saying to my GP, to her, I phoned her in desperation one day and I said, I'm having an affair. I'm seeing all these men. I don't know why I'm doing it. It's against my morals. I really don't know why I'm doing it. And she turned around and said to me, she knew a bit of my history. She said, I think you've got a sex addiction. So I then went to see a therapist who specialised in it. And she pointed me in the direction of SAA. And I spent the first 2 years going to meetings in and out of the rooms, not really getting it. I'd have short periods of about 2 or 3 months, what we call sobriety, we call abstinence sobriety.
Abstinence, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Our abstinence basically is worked out with a thing called 3 circles. Inner circle, which is our worst behaviours that count as a relapse for us, because everyone's different on that. Middle circle, which is the behaviours that can lead to that. And the outer circle, which is healthy behaviours. And the outer circle is where we aim to stay, basically. But my real rock bottom came. I'd had a big relapse. My daughter, who by now was coming to stay for weekends and holidays on her own with me, she found out what I was doing and was really devastated. My son was very scared for me and worried. And I did massive relapse. I think it was the October half term, when my daughter was away. And within 24 hours, 48 hours actually, I'd been awake for 48 hours, constantly on my phone, trying to find people to hook up with. I started selling myself through Craigslist.
This brings us straight to our question 4, really, and you've already said it, but let's just go into it for a second. So our question 4 is, did you ever want to die at your worst? Did you consider suicide?
Yes, I did. And I have to say, I did attempt it a few times as well. Yeah, I did. Yeah, it got so dark. Yeah.
I'm always going to stress this at this point to anyone who's feeling, who's having suicidal thoughts, and anyone who is in that darkness, please reach out. It doesn't have to be this way. There is a solution available right here. Let's talk about it and let's get to it.
Definitely.
Question 5. What other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms?
I tried a lot. Everything going, to be honest. Everything going. I tried getting help through church. Like, I tried to build my faith, but my faith is gone. I tried to control it. I tried to...
What did that look like, the controlling? What did you do in order to help yourself, quote unquote, control things?
I do things like... of course, I used to find contacts through social media and apps and stuff like that. I tried, like, not going near my phone. I tried blocking people and, like, going through the days, like, making myself go for a few days. I tried... Yeah, what else did I try? I tried the therapy. That didn't work. In fact, my therapist, I always joke about this. She got me to sign a bit of paper to say I wouldn't act out. And I mean, a bit of paper didn't stop me, did it? You know, I tried so many things. Yeah. I tried different therapies.
That's quite a lot already, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
How long would you be able to stay sober or abstinent with other methods?
Very, very short time. I mean, in the earlier days, I could go quite a long time, in months.
Yeah.
But towards the end, in the last year, literally probably about 48 hours. And then, couldn't control it. And it's like...
Once that progression hits, and this is something I've experienced myself, once that progression hits, it becomes ever more difficult with other things to stop yourself or at least pause yourself. And heaven knows I tried. So yeah. Thank you, Lisa. Our question 6, and this is interesting, given your upbringing in a religious household, right? So when you came into the rooms, and I mean, you came into the rooms many times, but well, when you came into the rooms at any time, really, did you struggle with the word God? And maybe there's different stories to tell there at the beginning and towards, the end when you came into the rooms and stayed.
Yeah, I really did. My first time round in the 90s, I was 24, by the way, when I went to rehab in the 90s. So quite young still. I really struggled. It was not somewhere I wanted to go. I was really angry towards church, very bitter. I resented the fact I'd been dragged to church as a child, against my will almost. Plus the fact that my abuser was a vicar, really couldn't get my head around it. I tried, just felt so uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
Looking back, that was my downfall. I couldn't embrace the higher power. That was my downfall. I white-knuckled it all that time, basically, because I couldn't. Coming back this time, I was aware. I was so desperate for help. I was so desperate that I was willing to embrace anything. I did still struggle. My first sponsor turned around and said to me, she'd been told that if she prayed in desperation for help from a God during addiction, that she must have believed in something, and even if she didn't. But I didn't even believe enough to pray in desperation. But what that gave me was a grounding to find my own higher power. And that was amazing to know I had the freedom to be able to find my own version, and that made all the difference. I was really ready to listen this time. And I knew if I didn't do that, I wouldn't get far. Yeah.
So it's your desperation, really, the depth of your step one experience that made you, I mean, we hear this all the time, but it's still worth pointing out that it's the depth of that experience that made you willing to just go, okay, well, I've got nothing else to try, so I might as well try this. If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Yeah, it really did. Yeah, I'm so glad I did. Yeah, so glad I did.
And our question 7, hot on the heels of that, how do you experience your higher power today?
Oh, I find it quite exciting. I love how it's deepening. To start with, my sponsor said to me, act as if almost, I didn't know what I was praying to, but I'd get down on my knees every day and pray. I got told to get on my knees and pray. And I felt a bit like a twat to start with, to be honest. Even though it was a little room on my own, I'd be looking around like, this is awkward. That sort of developed, and I could feel it working. And I did start with use people in the rooms and the message I was hearing. And I came to realise I've always had a really deep connection with nature and animals. I grew up with a lot of animals and in the countryside, and that was my go-to, that was my escape. So I've always, even in my dark times, actually, I've got a great garden at my house. I used to find peace sitting in my garden, looking at nature. And so I've embraced that. And these days, do you know what? I pray and I get coincidences, but I know they're not coincidences anymore. You know, I get so many examples all the time.
Yeah.
And just by handing over and trusting, I always hear what I need to hear back, even if it's not what I want to hear. You know, I've got so many examples of that. It just, you know, and it strengthens my faith, you know. Yeah.
Just for a quick second, let's go back to the very beginning, because this is something I discuss quite a lot with sponsees, of course, and so on. Those first few weeks or so when you start praying, but you have nothing really quite yet to pray to, how awkward it made you feel and so on. What was that like? And were there any moments in there that you particularly remember, or any turnaround moments really that you particularly remember?
Yeah, I mean, I did have to work really hard at it. I had to really force myself to, because I'd get up in the morning and some days I'd think, what's the point? Is it going to work? But, you know, I'd seen it work for my sponsor because, you know, obviously my sponsor was someone whose recovery I really admired. And she encouraged me to keep going with it. But then all of a sudden I did start to feel like a peace when I prayed, and I started to get relief. By like handing over my worries and stuff like that. I could just feel it. And one day I had this feeling just like I was getting a warm hug. And it's pretty amazing. And I've had other instances where I've prayed, and then I had one moment, I only go into it briefly, in Bristol, obviously there's quite a few homeless people. And I've had a time where I was homeless, going back quite a long way temporarily. And I always feel like if I've got time, I like to stop and talk, especially if there's a woman on the street, you know, just have a chat. And one day I'd walked past someone that I felt bad walking by. And I sort of apologised to God in my head and said, I felt like I should have done something there. Show me like if I could help anyone else today, you know. And literally 5 minutes later, I had someone put in my path who was desperate for my help. And who I totally identified with, you know, and I was able to do that. And that really showed me, I was like, wow, you know. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. As much as I would love to talk about homelessness now and the terrible situations there, I think it is still a recovery podcast. So let me focus on my next question, which is our question 8. Which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
Do you know what? I was thinking about this, and I think because I'd spent 2 years in and out of the fellowship, it took me a long time to get steps 1, 2, and 3, really. Yeah. It took me a long time to realise how powerless I was. And during that time, I did have, I think I had about 3 attempts of doing step 1. And each time it got progressively worse, but I couldn't really see it. There wasn't, so I got to that really bad point that I could see it. Since then, I haven't really totally struggled, but of course, step 4 and 5 was uncomfortable and a bit hard. But at the same time, I was ready for it, you know. I was so desperate to move on and like, okay, what's next? You know, I want to dump this stuff. And then once I dumped that stuff, I wanted to move on and be like, how do I stop having all these defects? And I'm sick of them, you know. Step 10, I guess I do struggle with a little bit, sometimes with motivation. Just sit down if you know I have to make myself do that, but it's quite worth it when I do.
Well, sometimes I think, you know, we all have those things that, you know, we don't want to do. That's what willingness is all about. You know, spiritual resistance is a reality, you know, and especially once you start and feel you don't have a proverbial gun to your head. That's when things get a bit more difficult, I suppose, and then that's when true willingness comes in, which is, you know, which I define as doing things that you're not really in the mood to do on the day. So, and our step 10 practice, I think, is always it's a bit of a telltale about how well I deal with this and how where my willingness really is at. So I think step 10 does have that sort of that function of telling me, look, you know, because if I sit around too long with something, right? I mean, there's always step 11 in my nightly review, of course, but still, step 10 practice is a really interesting conversation to have. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You spoke of character defects. Our question 9: which character defects give you most trouble?
Well, this is a really easy one. I'm of course about all of them basically, but in doing my step 5, I naturally could see that fear underpinned all my character defects. Well, a lot of them basically, but my worst one that I struggle with is procrastination. And again, what underpins that is either fear or perfectionism. I never realised what a perfectionist I am. And being such a perfectionist will hold me back from doing stuff I need to do because I think I'm scared of failing on it. And fear of taking responsibility, because I spent all my life leaning on other people, wanting other people to fix things for me, even codependent relationships and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I need a reminder sometimes that I'm an adult and I need to get off my butt and take responsibility myself. Yeah. So, that's my main things.
Perfectionism is a really funny one, isn't it? Because it's really paralyzing. Unless you do something absolutely perfectly, there's no point in doing it. And that can be really hard to tackle, I find.
It is. But thank God I've got step 6 and 7 for that. I rely on it a lot for that, to hand that over. I do pray about my prayers. So.
And out of those 2 that you mentioned, perfectionism and taking responsibility, so being responsible, I suppose, which one out of those 2 do you think you struggle the most with?
Perfectionism, definitely. Yeah. I found, due to my abuse, I think it's true for a lot of addicts actually, that we stop emotionally developing when the addiction starts, And when I came, when I came into recovery, I was aware how I had it pointed out to me actually, how childlike I was. And I felt like a child as well. And I had to do a lot of work to sort of grow up and know I had no responsibility. Now I feel like an adult most of the time, luckily. But, and I do, I could still have a little tantrum over having to do something, I ring my sponsor and stamp my feet a bit and say, I don't want to do this, And she goes, I've got a choice, get on with it.
I think some of, in terms of character defects, I think it is definitely true that I have this childishness, I think we all do, still within me. And I certainly think that as far as my relationship with power greater than myself, my place in the universe and the universe and everything, and humans and all of that, and the big picture, so to speak, that in that respect, when I came into recovery, I was definitely still a teenager. I'd stopped that development, I suppose. It's an arrested development case. I sort of at 14 or 15 and I was still essentially angry and feeling hard done by and all those things. So yeah, it's definitely also about becoming an adult in that respect. Yeah. Wonderful, well said, wonderfully said, thank you. Our question 10, what is the best thing recovery has given you?
Oh my goodness, do you know what? I'm really fortunate. My first year's given me so many rewards, I had to work quite early on making amends with my family, particularly my dad, because my daughter lives with him. My daughter's actually just turned 17. She spent 10 years living with him, I was always really angry with my dad.
Yeah.
Not justifiably, because it's been his friend, that abused me, and I took my anger out on my dad over that. My dad didn't know why.
He had no knowledge of this ever happening?
No, I always wondered if he did, but it turned out he didn't. And during the amends process, it became clear he really didn't. But we had to sit down and have the most honest chat. And my relationship with him and his wife is the best it's ever been, I've got my children in my life wanting to know me, which I'm very fortunate to have. The awards.
Yeah, lovely.
And I've just got freedom from the obsession, which is really amazing, and the preoccupation. That was just constant in my head. Even in early recovery, I battled with that, Just to be free of that is and to be present for my children, because whenever I was with them, I was preoccupied on my phone, trying to arrange a meet-up or whatever. And my daughter, to the point even, she'd say to me, Mum, it's like you're on the phone to a drug dealer, because I'm so absent mentally, and I get enjoyment from things now. I actually feel happy and enjoy stuff. I recently went to a church service with my dad, and for the first time I can remember, I came out feeling happy still, without feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
something amazing happened this Christmas. My dad and his wife felt able to invite themselves over for Christmas Day and for lunch. You know, they've never ever done that. They've always gone to my sister, and I've always been sort of left out of family gatherings around Christmas because I wasn't great being around. It was the opposite this year, you know. Again, I grumbled a bit about it. Oh, I've got to cook Christmas dinner. But it's remarkable that they were able to do that, you know. And both my children were with me. And it was a quietish day, but it's the most amazing day. And I've had to move back to the south.
If you've had a quiet Christmas, I think you've done well, you know, generally speaking.
Yeah. And do you know what? One of the biggest things is when I went into rehab as well back last November. So basically physically needed to get away from the place I was at too, you know, for safety reasons. But when I went in there, my family were pretty much done with me. My dad was angry and washed their hands at me. And during this process, you know, my dad's nearly 80 now. He's been bringing up my daughter and doing an amazing job, you know. And he didn't have to do that. She was going to be put up for adoption at the time he stepped in. And I couldn't even get off my backside to sort that out, you know. But he stepped in. Anyway, he's nearly 80 now, so he's getting a lot frailer. And I can see that now. And his wife has just been diagnosed with a life-limiting condition, you know. My daughter's a real handful. My daughter's got her own issues because of everything gone on. But I was in a position to be able to move back, to be near them, to help out, you know, which is quite God-given for me, yeah. My dad actually turned around and said, it's like God's brought you back into our lives at exactly the right time. Again, that wasn't in my plans, you know, it wasn't a plan in my head to do that. But God just presented this opportunity, really, and I was in a good place to fulfill that. So, but I'll be able to come back for my daughter. Sorry.
No. I was just reflecting, or about to reflect on the fact that it's not just the gifts of recovery are not just about things that we get, but also about the things that we're able to give. You know, and if you get the opportunity to show love and be helpful to those people we've hurt, perhaps, and whom we've turned away from and things, you know, then that makes it all the more powerful, you know.
Yeah, it does. And peace as well. That's one of the main things I've got now, peace of mind. And I know if I'm working a program in the day and I'm doing the next right thing, you know, I can live with myself. My self-worth come back more, you know. I can think I'm an all right person a lot of the time now and be happy with my day. And it's so satisfying to be able to get to the end of the day, put my head on the pillow, you know, clean, sober, abstinent, and whatever. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you. Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict? And let's go look at this from an SAA angle, if you don't mind.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's something we do because we do outreach. In SSA, we're encouraged from the beginning to speak to each other on the phone every day. And I speak to newcomers and I'd say, how are you feeling in yourself? Are you feeling happy? Are you not? More often than anything, they're not. And if people are wondering they're a sex addict, they normally are, to be honest, that time. I say, come to a meeting.
Yeah. Just
sit and listen, you know. As I say, at the beginning of a meeting to newcomers, just come for 6 meetings before you decide and see if it fits, see if you can identify, you know. That's what I'd say.
For anyone who might be listening to this pod and might be in that place, can I just ask also whether SAA, whether this is for, and let me try and phrase this as delicately as I possibly can, but is this for people who, where it's an interaction with other people, in terms of how they act out in their addiction, or is this also for people who may be acting out in terms of internet chats, masturbation, camera stuff, fantasy stuff, and so on? Is it for that as well?
Yeah, it covers a whole lot, a really broad range, you know. And even there's meetings, people with intimacy avoidance, you know, who stay away from all that as well.
Right.
I mean, I haven't said it in this podcast, but basically my behaviour's covered all those things, you know. It does for a lot of people. So, yeah, particularly for women, I find that it tends to be a lot more away from the phones and the porn and stuff. Women, you know, it can be that too, but it tends to be a lot more.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to, not necessarily, I mean, some men do too, but it can get a lot more risky and dangerous for women, I think, partly because women are well, I don't want to sound sexist or anything, but women are often more vulnerable,
Yeah.
Putting themselves out there in strange situations with strangers, dark places, middle of the night, remote places. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Our question: want your higher power to say to you at the pearly gates.
Well, Kevin, you finally listened. You've made it. Yeah. And you've done some good, basically. Yeah. I know he's tried to get me there, not to get to heaven, but he's tried to get me to listen a lot of times in my life, So, yeah, I finally listened.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Time has flown past. This has been such a lovely, lovely conversation, and it's really enlightening, actually, for me, and I hope for some of our listeners as well. God, you were really brave and courageous in sharing your experience, your strength and hope. It's very, very powerful. Thank you for being my guest today on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, I'm so grateful for what I've been given, and I just want other people to be able to have that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-Step Recovery Program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-Step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.